Fantastic. As Professor Mervyn Frost has said, I'm here to debate the motion, in support of the motion, that the primary cause of the continuation of the Arab-Israeli conflict is Islamic extremism. Now, I want to make one thing particularly clear from the outset. I don't see this issue as black and white. No one should. Anyone who does has not thought about the facts correctly. If there's one word I want to leave you with this evening, it's nuance. If there's one passion I want to leave you with this evening, it's not to be pro-Israel, it's not to be pro-Palestine, it's a passion to learn about this conflict. Because I feel the more you do, the better your understanding and the greater benefit there will be to the King's community and the community at large. While I argue that the primary cause for the continuation of this conflict is indeed Islamic extremism, only a fool would suggest that it is the only cause for the continuation of this conflict. There can be no doubt that Israeli mistakes and behaviour has contributed, and the failure to grant the legitimate national aspirations of the Palestinian people has also contributed. That said, I want to make the argument to you here this evening that for three key reasons, the primary cause of the continuation of this conflict is, as I say, Islamic extremism in the groups such as Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, and indeed parts of the Palestinian Authority itself. Now, I'm going to do this by contrasting the rhetoric and principles of these groups with Israel. I'll then move on to their actions and their behaviour. And finally, I'll describe to you how the combination of these two, combined with a movement throughout the wider region, is the cause and the primary cause, for the continuation of this conflict. So firstly, the rhetoric. People like to say that these two sides are as bad as each other. I urge people to look at the rhetoric. Israel that for 20 years has argued for a two-state solution. Israel that is committed to the democratic values and the rule of law, just as we are here in the United Kingdom. By no means a perfect society, but I put to you one that argues in favour continuously of a negotiated peace, as Prime Minister Netanyahu did just 2 weeks ago in a speech in Jerusalem, and I quote, "I am committed without exception to a two-state solution with the Palestinian people." Now, one should contrast this rhetoric and these principles with the groups that I argue are the primary cause for the continuation of this conflict. Let us look, for example, to the Hamas Charter, the first paragraph of which includes the line, "Israel will rise and will remain until Islam eliminates it as it has eliminated its predecessors." Now, I would be the last person to suggest that this is an accurate portrayal of Islam, one of the world's great religions, the vast majority of whose adherents are peaceful people who want nothing more than you do to live your lives and to achieve your dreams. Unfortunately, it is perverted by groups that adhere to an extreme misinterpretation, I would argue, of their holy text. It's not just Hamas, unfortunately. Look to Hezbollah, Nasrallah, the head of the terrorist group Hezbollah. I'm against any reconciliation with Israel. It is a cancerous tumour. As for Islamic Jihad, the clue is in the name. And when we look to Mahmoud Abbas, a man who denies the Holocaust as a proposed moderate in the region, I think it helps to explain the sort of neighbourhood Israel lives in. Now, people say often, well, rhetoric, principles, that's one thing, but by their acts you shall know them. Israel has consistently sought to make peace, and indeed has achieved it in 1979 with Egypt, an Arab and Muslim country, in 1994 with Jordan, an Arab and Muslim country. Why? Because the Arab people are not Israel's enemy. The Muslim people are not Israel's enemy. Israel's enemy, and indeed the enemy of all free societies, is extremist elements within the Islamic world. Now, it's not just peace with Egypt, it's not just peace with Jordan. It's the 2005 disengagement from Gaza and from more than 25 settlements in the West Bank. This demonstrates Israel's willingness to back up its rhetoric of seeking peace and its principles of democracy, humanitarian law, and equality between nations, with an ability to make peace, to negotiate, and those tough compromises that unfortunately too many times Islamic extremist groups have been unwilling to make. Look at the acts of Hamas, of Hezbollah, and of Islamic Jihad, who fire rockets down on Israeli citizens, who begin intifadas that claim hundreds of innocent lives on both sides, and who kidnap Israeli soldiers, holding them for years without reference to humanitarian bodies. Now, when I mention Israeli civilians, it is not to say that Israeli life is worth more than Palestinian life, or that Palestinian lives are not lost tragically, both at the hands of Israel and the groups that we have discussed. I have seen, myself having visited the West Bank, the suffering of the Palestinian people. There can be absolutely no doubt that it is real, and anyone who denies it is not acquainted with the facts. But I put it to you that it is not Israel who has consistently in its rhetoric, principles, and as I've demonstrated to you, its actions, that is the primary cause for the continuation of that suffering. Rather, it is the spoiler groups, groups like Hamas, groups like Hezbollah, groups like Islamic Jihad, who, if there was a peace with Israel, would not have a purpose to exist. For them, it is always worth jihad over a settlement of the Palestinian question, and it is that, I argue, the primary cause. Now, of course, we're here tonight talking about the Arab-Israeli conflict. This isn't only about Israel-Palestine. There are groups in Saudi Arabia, Wahhabist influences, that fund this terrorism. There is Iran, the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, that continues to fund this terrorism. And indeed, I put it to you this evening, ladies and gentlemen, that the ideology of Hamas, of Hezbollah, and of Islamic Jihad is nothing to do with Palestinian liberation. That is the job of Fatah, that is the job of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. No, the groups that I'm talking to you about this evening, ladies and gentlemen, who continue and perpetuate this conflict, hold the same ideology of the people who brought the blood, who brought the carnage, and who brought the attacks into the cities of New York, into the cities of Madrid, and of course, most powerfully for the people in this audience, to London. Those are the groups who bear primary responsibility for this conflict, not a state that has repeatedly sought to make peace and indeed has achieved it with several of its neighbours. For these reasons, I urge you to support the motion. Thank you.
Well, Professor Frost, we learned so many things in that 10 minutes. It would take me 10 minutes to address each and every single thing that we learned. We learned, for a start, that primary doesn't mean primary. The motion is inviting you to conclude that the primary cause of the Arab-Israeli dispute is Islamic extremism, except for all the other reasons that were adumbrated in the opening speech. We learned that Israel has for 20 years been desperately trying to bring about a two-state solution, a point I will have to return to. We learned that actually all of the representatives of the Palestinian people are in fact persona non grata. Not just the Islamic ones, but President Mahmoud Abbas, a man so moderate as to be a mouse, a man regarded almost universally in Palestinian society as the most moderate political representative it's possible to imagine, is described as a Holocaust denier and therefore presumably beyond the pale. Certainly not a negotiating partner. Here we have again an example of supporters of Israel and Israel itself seeking to pick and choose with whom they will negotiate, with whom they will make peace. We learned that there are different kinds of terrorists. There's the terrorists who brought about the existence of the State of Israel in the first place, the ones who, for example, shot in the face and killed Count Bernadotte, the United Nations mediator in the conflict, the man who pulled the trigger, by his own admission in his memoirs, was no less than the Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Shamir. He pulled the trigger and killed the United Nations Special Envoy. There are others, of course. There are terrorists like the Irgun, like the Stern Gang, like Mr. Begin, also a former Prime Minister of Israel. There are the terrorists who hanged the British soldiers in the orange groves near Tel Aviv. There are the terrorists who blew up the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, killing 93 British civil servants and other British civilians. These are never mentioned. But other terrorists are apparently central to this question. I'm having to race through these points, if you don't mind my saying so, because of the absurd time limit of 10 minutes which has been given to both of us for this opening session. I want to argue the precise opposite of what has been said, insofar as there is Islamic extremism in the wider Middle East, in the wider Muslim world, and in the Palestine-Israel conflict. It is because of the failure of other political stripes, nationalist and progressive stripes, to liberate the land, to return the Palestinian people to their country, and the willful collaboration of Western governments with Israel that have made that failure obvious and inescapable. President Arafat, with whom I was long associated, was certainly no Islamist extremist. He was a nationalist, progressive leader. Yet I sat with him in the compound in Ramallah whilst Israeli bulldozers and military vehicles literally demolished the headquarters around his ears and our ears, and then murdered him by poisoning just a few months later. This much I know because I was there at the bedside of President Arafat when he perished. He was no Islamic extremist, but no Israeli leader would make peace with him. Hamas only are the political power that they are in the Palestinian arena today because Israel refused to carry out the commitments that it made in the Oslo Agreement with President Arafat. Insofar as there is a problem in the wider Muslim world of Islamist extremism, it's precisely because people have sided with Israel, armed Israel, financed Israel, helped to protect Israel in the United Nations, vetoed resolutions critical of Israel, given Israel the entire wherewithal that it requires in order to continue the expropriation of the Palestinian people, which is my last point, and it's this. I'm sorry, Mr. Gardner, the primary reason for the Arab-Israeli conflict is the disappearance of a country called Palestine, which used to be on everybody's map, is on the mural dated 1189 in the entrance hall to the Houses of Parliament. I just walked past it again 30 minutes ago, 1189, country called Palestine, no longer exists. The Palestinian people were scattered to the four corners of the earth. There are people without passports, without papers, without status, hunted from pillar to post, regularly massacred, attacked. I could go on about Gaza and the siege and the West Bank and the occupation and the annexation, illegal, of Jerusalem itself, as well as the Golan Heights. I could talk about the 13 million Palestinians, most of whom live outside of the country's borders, but who retain the keys and the title deeds, the papers which prove their ownership of homes and land, which is now lived on by immigrants from other countries around the world, who will not let them return. If you want a definition of the word primary, that's the primary reason for the Arab-Israeli conflict, that the Palestinian people have been dispersed and expropriated, and Palestine as a country has been wiped off the map. I am not a racist, nor an anti-Semite, and just like the madman released from an asylum is the only man who can prove he's sane because he has a certificate to prove it, I have a certificate to prove I am not a racist or an anti-Semite, from the High Court not that far from here. So please don't casually make these defamatory, libelous statements in public arenas. You're obviously not a law student. I have no problem talking to Israelis in this context. And Mr. Gardner has done some research and found that I've shared platforms with Israeli Arabs. He might have done a little more research and found that I'd shared many platforms with Israeli Jews. What was different between the Israeli Jews I shared a platform with and the one I refused to share a platform with was that the ones I did share a platform with were completely opposed to the apartheid state of Israel. So it has nothing despite your libelous connotations, to do with whether the Israeli is Arab or Jewish. And on the subject of the truth and the United Nations, wasn't it the United Nations that you have just reviled so colourfully that invented the State of Israel in the first place? The very same I dare say Burkina Faso didn't have a vote in 1948. As Upper Volta, it was a colony, just like Palestine is a colony today. But there were some pretty rum crews voting for Israel that day. Second amongst them, in fact, first amongst them, not second, first amongst them was Joseph Stalin and the USSR, which was the principal supporter of the resolution to support, to set up Israel in 1948. You can laugh, but it happens to be true. And on the subject that was raised, I just said, you weren't listening, I don't support a two-state solution because such a solution is no solution at all. It's first, topographically, demographically impossible because of the settlement and annexation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And it is politically impossible because no Zionist leader will ever allow a meaningful Palestinian state to emerge alongside it. That much is surely obvious after all these decades of so-called negotiation. The only solution is a democratic state from the river to the sea, where everybody's equal. What's wrong with that? Why can't you accept that? I'll tell you why. Because you want a state in which the words Jewish state can be applied. Well, I'm sorry, Jews are not a race. They're not a nationality. Judaism is a religion. I can become a Jew. Does that give me the right to go and live in a Palestinian's house in Palestine? Sammy Davis Jr. was a Jew, but I assure you his family had never touched the shores of the Mediterranean. It's a complete fabrication, this idea that Zionism has, that it has the right to kick one people out, take their homes, their land, wipe their country off the map, and the people are going to accept it. Well, I've got news for you, they ain't accepting it.
Turning conflicts, I would advise you, into number games is rarely a good idea. Let me explain to you why. The fact that Israel invests in creating bomb shelters does not make it morally repugnant. The fact that Israel invests in the Iron Dome to stop missiles hitting its children does not make it morally repugnant. I did not for one moment deny the suffering of Palestinians. I have witnessed it personally. It is deplorable. Everything should be done to stop it. But I do not believe in an eye for an eye. I do not believe because at the moment more Palestinians have died than Israelis, we should line up a bunch of Israelis and let Hamas shoot them until the numbers are more even. I don't think that's a helpful contribution to solving this conflict. Now, I think that the point made by the gentleman regarding India-Pakistan is a very important one. My historical background is indeed in looking at partitions, and it's a worthy question. I think I'll leave that one for Mr. Galloway. This misnomer...
Why not answer it?
Well, I believe that in my opinion, peoples who want to be separate and who want to create a state based on their own national self-determination, a right guaranteed under the United Nations Charter, have a right to do so. This is the opinion of the majority of Israelis. It's also the opinion of the majority of Palestinians who don't want to live with Israelis. And therefore I believe that the creation, now we do not have time to go into all of the things involved in the partition between India and Pakistan, but I believe that in general the creation of states by people who want to live as national entities together should not be discouraged. That's why I'm a proud supporter of the establishment of a Palestinian state. I'll just give one final point and then I'll hand over to Mr. Galloway. I want to push back on this idea that President Ahmadinejad, who is of course the gentleman you're referring to, does not want to wipe Israel off the map. If you don't believe the translations, and there are pages and pages written about it on the internet if you really have the time, then why don't you look at who he hands his money to? He gives it to Hezbollah and to Hamas, who fire missiles at Israeli children and Israeli civilians. That, to me, smacks of someone who is making good on his promise. That is why it's such a concern to so many people that he's seeking nuclear weapons. And I would be very careful before thinking that he's actually a cuddly teddy bear who's just talking tough.
But Israel has hundreds of nuclear weapons. Hundreds of them. We know that because the brave Jewish whistleblower Mordechai Vanunu came to London to tell us so, and earned 18 years in solitary confinement as a reward in an Israeli dungeon. When he was brought to court, they wired his jaws together like Hannibal Lecter so that he couldn't tell us anymore. You have the nerve as a supporter of Israel to talk about other people and nuclear weapons. Israel has never declared its nuclear weapons. They obtained them illegally. They refused to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They will not allow any inspections. And you pray in aid the non-existence, but perhaps future existence of someone else's nuclear weapons. It's preposterous. Now, this is supposedly the Department of War Studies. It's a college, at least, at which the Department of War Studies is a central part. I'm sure that Professor Frost has taught you that wars have causes. And it's the cause of the rockets that you need to address, not just their military ineffectiveness, not because of bomb shelters, but because they're fireworks that don't even have targeting mechanisms on them. We want to talk about real rockets, talk about the real rockets that the United States gives Israel in such profusion, gratis. And by the way, your 1.9 billion dollars per year story that you told the audience a couple of minutes ago is absolute bunkum. Israel receives $7 billion a year from public, private, and military largesse in the United States of America, not 1.9 billion.
I'm not quite sure why Mr. Galloway keeps pointing across the table whenever he says the word Israel, because just to be clear, I brought my British passport, so he knows he's allowed to debate me. I don't represent the Israelis. Individual Israelis don't represent the government. I haven't received any barrels of oil secretly from Qatar, so I'm not really sure where that side of it's going, Mr. Galloway. But you heard it here. Hamas was invented by Israel, an organization whose stated aim is to destroy it. Okay, that's good. That's embarrassing, I agree with you. That's a good word for this evening, Mr. Galloway.
Very embarrassing.
Now, let's move on to some of the other,
is it true or untrue,
questions.
Is it true or untrue?
Mr. Galloway, you've had your moment. The way debates work, you let one person speak, then you don't stole mouth, you listen to the response. Now let's talk about Let's talk about the questions, Mr. Galloway, if you'd like to stay anyway. Rantin asked about the settlements. This is important. Listen, Benjamin Netanyahu, not my kind of guy. Not the guy I would vote for. I vote Labour. Okay? I don't vote for people like Netanyahu. Now, certainly, settlements have continued to be built. Now, there's some extent, this is a bit of an exercise, in that this is what Israel and the Palestinians are meant to negotiate about. It's difficult to understand how negotiations can work if it is the demand from one side that the other side give up everything that is meant to be negotiated before the negotiations even begin. Therefore, if the Palestinians are anxious to stop the settlements, as I believe well they should be, it is imperative that they debate and more importantly negotiate with the Israelis. Now, Hamas and Hezbollah aren't prepared to do that because they don't make a distinction.
What does that have to do with it?
Well, they're one of the many groups that attack Israel on the basis of its very existence.
Well, isn't it a Palestinian organization?
Mr. Galloway,
let him speak, please. Let him speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's always helpful to have a chairman, isn't it, Mr. Galloway? Now, these groups...
You're floundering, by the way. Anyway, now I believe that those settlements, many of those settlements will come down in the final negotiation.
They'll happen between parties to a conflict who still believe the other should exist at the end of negotiations. That's not the extremist groups that I've argued are the primary cause for the continuation of the conflict. Now, as for the cause of Islamic extremism, I'd recommend taking seminars in the War Studies Department and perhaps in the Middle Eastern Studies Department, because I don't think we have enough time and I'm not qualified to give all the answers. Certainly, injustice plays an important role. No one should deny, it would be ignorant and cruel at the same time to deny that there has been grave suffering not just in Palestine but across the Arab world and indeed across the wider Muslim world. Now that combines with various factors including poverty, extreme ideologies, lack of education to combine into extremist Islamic groups. Now the point is, one cannot pretend that Jews living in the area of Israel-Palestine causes people to blow themselves up on tube trains in London, as Mr. Galloway seems to make a connection. It's just wrong. Now, finally, in terms of whether Israel should learn from the United Kingdom and the United States when it comes to dealing with terrorism, here I fear we might have a rare point of agreement. Britain and America's way of dealing with terrorism in Afghanistan and Iraq is not an example to anyone. Now, there can be absolutely no doubt that there are Palestinians killed in the crossfire in the conflicts, as you rightfully identified, because the groups Israel is fighting against hide behind civilians. There's also the problem of absolutely human error. Perhaps people would like to take the time to investigate how many times human error brings around civilian deaths in conflicts in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Colombia, around the world. I'm not pretending war is pleasant or that the Gaza Strip is a paradise place to live, but that doesn't mean that it's Israel's fault that we haven't reached an agreement. I would rather blame the groups that fire missiles from schools and fire missiles from hospitals at civilians. Thank you.
The war between the Palestinians and the Israelis has a cause. That's elementary in a department of war studies. What's the cause? The cause is that one group of people came and took the country, the land, and even the houses and the orange groves of another people and kicked them out. That is the primary cause. The meaning of the word primary, that is the primary cause of this conflict. And I've got news for the supporters of Israel in here. This conflict will continue, if necessary forever, until the Palestinians get justice. No justice, no peace. And no peace in Palestine means no peace in the Middle East, means no peace in the world. I would have thought students like you had an interest in addressing that.
I feel we ran away a little bit from the title of this debate, which you guys can all see up on the screen, which is about what is the primary cause of the continuation of this conflict. And I set out in my first speech issues relating to what I believe is the rhetoric and principles of Islamic extremist groups within the region, and also their action and behaviour, how the two combine to prolong this conflict and prevent moderate voices on both sides from reaching a reasonable agreement. Now, I'm not sure if we're going to go ahead with having a vote, but if we do, I hope people will vote on the basis of the motion, on the basis of the arguments I put forward and Mr. Galloway put forward, and not on any personal animosity or bad opinion you might have about either of us. But my argument really can be put down into those three sentences. Look to the rhetoric and the principles of Islamic extremist groups in the region in contrast to Israel's. Look at their actions and their behaviour, and together you will understand that they form part of an attitude that is not about Palestinian liberation, but is rather about global jihad, which, though unrepresentative of your average Muslim, has tragically hijacked the image of Islam in our society, and I fear for a real reason. It presents a real danger to our society and to Israel's, and that, I believe, is the primary cause for the continuation of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, the proposition must fall because of the word primary. And I said that right at the beginning of my opening address, and I say it again now. Even the proposer of the motion actually doesn't believe that it is the primary cause, and that was evident both from his opening and closing addresses. It would be infantile to pass this motion. It would be unbecoming of an educational institute of this level of prestige, and it would be especially infantile from a college which has at its heart a Department of War Studies and professors like Professor Frost, who must have and must do all the time teach their students that conflicts have causes. Conflicts have primary causes. And by definition, the primary cause of the Arab-Israeli conflict cannot be Islamic extremism because it long predates the existence of Islamic extremism. Secondly, insofar as there is a developing problem of Islamic extremism, and there is in this country and around the world, insofar as there is, it's precisely because of the failure to address the primary cause of such conflicts as the Palestinian issue. It's precisely because the Palestinians fester for more than 65 years, fester, stateless, paperless, passportless. You're lucky you can wave your British passport. Millions of Palestinian people have no passport and may never have a passport. They have no ability to travel. They are to be found at the borders of every Arab state begging, pleading to be allowed in as mendicants. Mr. Nathan is still in his place. I didn't deal earlier with his point. Let me do so now. If you think that anybody in this debate, but most especially me, is here as a spokesman for the rotten, corrupt dictatorships that rule the Arab world almost without exception from one end to the other, you haven't been paying attention in your time in Britain. I am the foremost. This afternoon in the British Parliament, I urge you to read my debate with the Foreign Office Minister from this very afternoon in Parliament, dealing with these rotten Arab regimes that you wish to use in a debate as a stick to beat the Palestinian people with. Shame on you as an Iraqi. That's what I should have said earlier, and I'm glad I've had the chance to say it now. The Palestinian people's disinheritance, the expropriation of their country, their absolutely miserable existence, that's the primary cause of the continuation of the conflict. Islamic extremism is vaulting ahead precisely because of the Palestine issue, the occupation of Arab and other Muslim lands, but above all, the propping up of these rotten Arab dictators by countries like ours. And Israel, of course, never had to do any of that before, although it's currently engaged. I talked to you about the Unholy Alliance. You can all look it up. It's a matter of fact. Israel created Hamas. That's a fact. Do look it up. Do ask your professors about it. How is this for an unholy alliance? How about the one that's operating in Syria today between Israel, the United States, Britain, France, and Al-Qaeda, and the jihadists, the hand-chopping, throat-cutting jihadists that you can see on the news every night in Syria? How's that for an unholy alliance? How's that for hypocrisy on the subject of Islamic extremism? I don't know if you're taking a vote or not. If you vote for this motion, then the teachers here are not having the impact they should. Thank you very much.
All those who support the proposition, hands up.
Chair, are abstentions in order?
Yes, certainly I'll ask for abstention. All those who oppose the motion, hands up. All the abstentions, please. Thank you. On your behalf, now, I want to make one personal remark and then I want to thank the speakers. The personal remark is, you can hear very well, I am a South African. And I have a great sense of deja vu this evening. I'll leave it at that. I want to thank both speakers. I think they both gave you a very good defense of their positions. I want to thank the speakers from the floor. You were very precise, to the point, and articulate. Nobody rambled. Well done, everybody. Thank you for coming.